In this lesson, we're going to look at the channels of perception. Our senses are like channels on a radio. They allow us to tune into certain kinds of information and different sensations. Our senses are the way that our consciousness and our awareness can interface with the world around us and navigate our internal world. The most obvious senses are the physical senses of sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. When we really start to work with these senses and be more mindful and enhance them, we start to have the ability to have really heightened sensation. Our experiences get richer. We are able to have subtleties come forward, and our pleasure increases because our capacity for experiencing and feeling and for sensation increases. Interestingly enough, it's been found also in studies that by bringing your attention to pain, it can actually lessen the experience rather than our body bracing. When we allow ourselves to feel it and feel the sensation, it can actually ease pain. If we think of these senses in the same way that we think about a fine wine connoisseur, we can develop these senses so that we can really experience them, the subtleties and the richness of them. And each of the senses have an equivalent. So just like with taste, we've got the wine connoisseur or the food taster that's able to discern, say, tobacco in a wine or versus cherry essence or all the different subtleties. For somebody else who's just drinking and tasting wine, you can't necessarily discern between those flavors or between wines. Similarly, with touch, things like being able to be an Eastern medicine acupuncturist and read pulses, or be able to read Braille. That's a sense of touch that's been refined and able to now discern what the ordinary touch sense is not able to. Sight, things like micro expressions or being able to recognize patterns. As an artist, you're able to see composition and be able to see color and pattern in different ways. For example, hearing, being a cracker or a doctor who's able to discern from a heartbeat, being able to hear slight differences. Or in smell, the idea of a perfume designer and being able to discern different elements and different notes in smell. The inner senses are the way that we navigate our internal world, and similarly, we can enhance these and experience them by navigating and understanding what's happening. So we have emotions. We're going to be in the next lesson talking about our emotional GPS and how we can use that in order to be able to navigate. We also have our thoughts, these internal movements of desires and impulses. So we have a craving for food, or we have the desire to want to move. We also have sort of this idea of personal space or proprioception, which is our ability to know where our body is in relationship to space and balance. And things like heartbeat and breathing, getting goosebumps, pain, all of these are sensations that we're not necessarily aware of all the time, but we can bring our attention to them and be able to have experiences of them. The third kind of senses are our subtle senses. Now, I think of these as equivalent to the physical senses, but they are in our mind's eye version of them. So, for example, if I were to say to you right now, oh, there's a pencil floating in the air and it's a number 2 pencil. At the top is a pink eraser and at the bottom is a sharpened lead tip. You can see the number 2 pencil floating in the air, but you don't necessarily see it actually in front of you. That sense of mind's eye is where the subtle senses come into play. It's the same for hearing. Audience is the ability to hear. So things like, oh, right now, can you hear the song Happy Birthday in your head? You can hear that in your mind's ear, so to speak. We also have the ability to have gut feelings, those physical internal sensations. To get also goosebumps in some ways can also be a subtle sense or response when we see something that's inspiring and the top of our head tingles. There's also claircognizance, which is the ability to just know. There's a sense of just suddenly like, I know this is true. You could feel it as in your gut, or just an overall sense of just calm where you just know something to be true or some information has come in. And there's the more unknown ones too, such as clairgustance, which is actually the ability to taste. So sometimes psychics can have this experience of having the taste of a metallic flavor come into your mouth, or you're having a memory of your grandmother and you suddenly taste her cookies. These can be the signals that we're plugged into something, and depending on how you develop these skills, you may or may not have any one of these senses, but they're there, and it's great to be aware of them, because you can have, even if that's not a normal channel for you, it can be really interesting to suddenly have that experience. Things like also smells, things people have been known to smell roses, for example, when they've seen visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Or another one is touch, the ability to be able to touch objects, psychometry, where we're able to touch objects and get information. So these subtle senses are, in essence, mirrors of physical senses. However, they are using the channel of imagination. And in the lesson of the subtle senses and the imagination, we'll be looking more closely at that relationship. It's important to remember that the channels or senses are how the information comes in. So for example, using a subtle senses example, if you're a medium and you're able to access people who have passed over, you might see visuals of people and be able to describe what they physically look like. Or maybe you're hearing words and somebody's speaking to you. Or you might just have this sense of suddenly knowing the person and don't even know how. Or it might be all of the above. But each of those are a separate channel. And it's also really important to realize that channels are about the sensation and the information, not the interpretation. So for example, you might feel your heartbeat get faster, but there's lots of reasons why your heartbeat might be increasing. It could be from excitement and fear, or arousal, or it could be a symptom of a heart problem. We want to make sure that we really parse out and and look at these channels and these senses as separate from the meaning behind them and the interpretation. The way we have our beliefs and automatic assumptions and a whole bunch of stuff gets tangled in there, and we want to learn how to really parse them out. We want to learn how to experience each of the channels also separately, so that we can then cultivate the different channels and expand the number of channels that we have. Of course, you're going to have dominant channels. There's certain ones that I'm very visual. Somebody else might have more of a sense of kinesiology of being able to physically feel something. So depending on the channel, we have the dominant ones, but we also want to really consciously cultivate the other ones. And that allows us to have a more filled out experience. And as we put them together, there's a whole other level of experience that we can start to have, in a richness that happens. So for example, just looking at how an experience of eating an apple can be changed depending on the channels that you're using. You can be looking at the physical, what does it taste like, sweet, sour, what does it smell like? What does it feel like in your mouth? What does it sound like when you're crunching into it? What are the other sounds that are around you while you're eating it? Bringing your senses to the external, not just the what's happening in this moment, but the greater surroundings. And also then the inner senses. What does it feel like when it starts to go down your throat and in your stomach? Is your body reacting to it? Does it bring up emotions when you're eating that apple? Maybe it's reminding you, bringing up a memory of the last time you ate an apple with your best friend or your grandmother who had passed. Brings up memories, or it brings up an emotion. Maybe there's a sense of dislike of eating an apple because it's healthy and you'd rather be eating something else. And whatever thoughts you have and beliefs you have and moods, what comes up as you're eating the apple? And again, it's important to remember, what are the sensations or the movements rather than the why. That's another layer, that's purpose, that's sense making, which is still all in there, but we're wanting to also be aware that they're two different channels. And then there's the whole subtle senses of eating an apple. Can you feel its energy, its chi? Can you have can you tune in and feel its appleness, the essence of apple? Does the apple have a consciousness? Can you have a conversation with the consciousness of this apple? Does the apple have a message for you? How is eating this apple impacting the environment around you? How are your actions and what you're doing right now with this apple impacting the greater experience around you? Or others are eating around you, and how is your experience of the apple impacting them? These are all different ways that we can start to look at eating an apple. Some of them might sound kind of silly, but there's a whole range when we start to really understand all these channels. There's a whole range of ways that we can experience and choose to experience eating a simple apple. In the next lesson, we'll be looking at the types of focus and how that also impacts and combines with the channels of perception.